In December, the South Dakota Animal Industry Board named Dr. Mendel Miller as the next state veterinarian and the executive secretary of the South Dakota Animal Industry Board. He says, I am grateful for the opportunity and for the privilege of working alongside of previous state veterinarians, of which whom I've had learned so much. I'm especially thankful to Dr. Sam Holland, Dr. Dustin Odekoven, and Dr. Beth Thompson for their leadership, guidance, and support over the years. Please welcome Dr. Miller.
As I get older, I have to decide whether I want to see close or far, so I'm trying to look over top here. I didn't put a presentation together to bore you and put you to sleep with slides and things like that, so I just want to hit what is important to you all. If I'm not answering your questions and giving you the information you want to hear, then I'm really wasting your time, and I don't want to do that. So at any time as I talk or as we have discussions, at any time if you have a question, just raise your hand. It's a wide room, so I may not see it, so be patient, or somebody can help me out, and don't be afraid to speak up and ask to be recognized. So a little bit of New World screwworm. That's the topic of interest right now. Definitely the emerging disease, if you can call it a disease. I think it's important to understand that we've been preparing for this for a couple years now. It's been obvious that New World screwworm was going to move north and probably eventually impact the United States. So there's been a lot of plans and things like that in place. As much preparation as possible, as with most things when it actually gets here and you have to put those plans into effect. Sometimes there's questions that you didn't anticipate. So there's always challenges to that. I'll abbreviate it as NWS sometimes. I get a little tongue-tied with that whole deal, but we're talking about the same thing. I think it's important to remember that this is not the first time that screwworm has been in the United States. It was widespread across the southern part of the United States in the early 1900s all the way up until the mid-1900s. In about 1930, they started to try to control it and get it, maybe confine it to smaller areas and stuff like that, and then eventually eradicate it. Until the 50s, they were pretty unsuccessful with that. And the tool that they used that came about in the 1950s was the production of sterile flies. And that's an irradiation process where they expose flies to the radiation. It sterilizes both the males and the females, but it's important to sterilize the males. The female screwworm mates only once in her lifetime. If she mates with a sterile male, then she does not produce viable eggs, and that's really important. So the strategy is to overpopulate the area with sterile males, and then you have a bunch of females that are not laying viable eggs, and you basically control the population or the population dynamics that way. So that became more accepted. They kind of got the technique perfected in the 50s. In 1959, they started in Florida. The traditional boundary of screwworm at that time was basically if you draw a line from central Kansas south all the way across the United States. So central Kansas is kind of the northern edge. Certainly winter and things like that is what established that line, I guess, or helped to set that line. But everything south of that line was affected. So in 1959, they started in Florida, and they started releasing sterile flies, and they started pushing the population to the west. And by 1966, the United States was recognized as being free of New World screwworm. Now, that didn't mean that we didn't have cases. there was periodic cases that popped up for several years. And in fact, 1972, Texas alone had 90,000 cases. So when somebody says that we're free of screwworm, they were free of screwworm technically, but that's 90,000 cases. That's pretty significant. However, that was kind of the last year where they had a ton. Are you guys getting a lot of feedback here? Is that bad, or are we good? Anybody? Good? Okay. So that was kind of the last year, 1972, that they had a really major number of cases. There was a sporadic case introduced to the United States through movements and things like that periodically over time. The last big outbreak was in Florida, in the Florida Keys, in the key deer in 2016. There's about 1,100 key deer exist. That's an endangered population, and it killed over 150 deer in that outbreak. Although they were able to contain it, again, same technique, sterile fly release. It kind of started on the northern edge of where the fly had established and drove it south off basically into the ocean. One of the things that helps us in the control and the screwworm issue itself is a fly is not super mobile. The adult fly without assistance will usually only travel about 10 or 12 miles in its lifetime, and the lifetime is really short too. So that helps, and that also allows us to control it better with the the sterile fly release to confine those wild flies. So once the United States was clear, then they started trying to clear Mexico, and the same technique, the sterile fly release. They pushed the fly population south through Mexico, through Central America, until it was basically at the edge of Panama. And if you know your geography better than I do, at that point, Central America is very narrow. It's about 30 miles wide. So they were able to kind of form an area there in that 30-mile land bridge to where they could release sterile flies and contain the flies south of that with a limited number of sterile flies. They were making about 100 to 125 million sterile flies a week, and that was containing the problem there in Panama at the edge of that. Unfortunately, between Panama and Colombia, that's where the line was. That's called the Darien Gap, if you want to look it up. But unfortunately, after a long success of holding it in place there, the fly escaped through most likely illegal animal movement and got north of that barrier. And then the response was, of course, to try to release sterile flies further north to continue to hold it back. But unfortunately, the width of the land mass in Central America there, and then as it got into southern Mexico, it's just too wide a land mass for the sterile flies to be successful. They just couldn't make enough sterile flies. And again, that's because there was really only one facility in Panama making sterile flies at the time. Once it was eradicated from Mexico, U.S., Central America, those facilities that were making those flies were taken out of production. So it's been about 2 years since that's escaped and started moving north. It takes a while to stand up laboratories to produce more sterile flies and things like that. They've gotten one in Mexico now. They've retrofitted to produce sterile flies. There's one in Texas that's being stood up as fast as possible. The original goal, I think, or the prediction was that would be fully operational in August of 2027. Last week we heard that timeline may be moved up several months, which would certainly help. But right now, the facility in Mexico and the facility in Panama can produce about 100 million flies a week. So that's 200 million. When the facility in Texas comes online, and hopefully that'll be another 150 million. So there'll be 350 million sterile flies per week that they'll have to release. the estimation is that if this fly becomes widespread, it'll take closer to 700 million sterile flies per week to continue to confine it or keep the spread or prevent the spread. So there's a problem there with the math, right? The one thing that is optimistic or does show some hope is that they're working on an ability to only produce the male flies. So right now, when they release 350 sterile flies, half of them are males and half of them are females. So your actual productive number is 50% of the total. They're working on the technology. It's close to where we can get it to all males to be released, which will double our effective population. So that's good. Again, that's just one of the things that we have to our advantage now that they didn't have in the 60s when they eradicated it the first time. One of the things that is to our disadvantage is the fact that animals and people move way more now than they did 60 years ago. The livestock, as all of you know, moves throughout the nation much more frequently and much greater distances. People are the same way. People, I think 60 years ago, I know when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, if we traveled 80 miles, 90 miles to go to a bigger town for shopping or something like that, we did that maybe once a year, maybe twice. And now people go 300 miles, 400 miles every other week. So that doesn't take into account the travel to see family, which is more spread out, vacationing and things like that. And the thing about the New World screwworm, I should have started probably with this, but what makes it really unique is that every warm-blooded animal is susceptible to it. And the difference between it and all the other flies is that the larva feeds on live tissue, where the larva of other flies feeds only on dead and necrotic tissue. So that's what makes it very, very harmful as well. It causes a lot of damage. The larvae burrow into live tissue, and they'll continue to burrow until they're either treated or they hit a system that is vital to the animal and the animal dies. And if anybody's ever looked at pictures or Googled it, you see the pictures of the deer down in Florida. The larvae attacked the antlers when they were growing, especially, and then once they did that, then they burrowed right into the head of the animal, and they'd burrow down and eat flesh until there was exposed skull, and the animals would still be living and walking around and things like that. So crazy pictures as far as what the larva can do. They can somewhat uniquely as well, they can enter the body through a very tiny wound. It does usually take a wound for them to get to through or into the body, but it can be as small as a tick bite. So I'm not sure if I probably never considered a tick bite to be a wound, but that can be the avenue for these flies to lay eggs and to infect an animal. So the current state right now is it's confined to Texas. There was a case in a dog in New Mexico, but that dog has been treated. It's inactive. There's no other cases in New Mexico, so it's only in Texas. And this information changes daily. So I looked it up this morning before I headed out here. We have 6 counties in Texas that are currently active or have active cases. There's 9 other counties in Texas that have had cases that have now gone inactive. So that's a good thing. The total case count is 41 animals in the United States since it started June 3rd. And we were just talking a little bit ago, it seems to be 1 or 2 a day. It doesn't seem to be getting a lot more frequent. Once in a while we'll have a day where we don't have a case, but 1 or 2 a day, pretty standard. Just get the update. Right now we've had 21 cases in cattle, 13 in sheep, 4 in goats, and 3 dogs. the typical avenues or the typical, what they've attributed the infestations to. Castrations, number one. That's probably, newborn calves are probably the most common target for this fly, because the navel is automatically an avenue for infestation. So castrations are second on that as far as cattle. Tail docking in sheep, certainly a big issue. Dehorning there's a couple of those, and then just average ordinary injuries down south there where they have desert conditions. Everything either bites you or stabs you or causes a wound of some kind, and cattle are no different. So anyway, that's the cases, and that's how it's happening. What are they doing down there? Texas has, as soon as a case is identified, Texas animal health officials and the USDA animal health officials have some strike teams that they establish a 20-kilometer zone around that case, and that's called the infested zone. They have another 20-kilometer circle around that, which is a surveillance zone. They stop movement out of that first infested zone, that first 20 kilometers. They stop movement out of that zone. They set up roadblocks and checkpoints. They have people on the ground checking livestock and premises within that zone. There's a requirement for treatment and a requirement for inspection from either a veterinarian or certified animal health inspectors before animals can come out of that zone. It's very effective for livestock. Texas, like a lot of states in the United States, doesn't have a lot of authority over non-livestock species, so cats and dogs and things like that. They're suggesting and they're trying to keep them within those zones, but they don't have the authority to actually stop them and quarantine them. So that is a risk, that is a concern for a lot of states, is the movement of those non-livestock species. However, so far, that's not really been, there's not been a great number, and the dog in New Mexico is kind of an oddity, but the other two dogs that have been positive have been closely associated with livestock species. So, in the surveillance zone around the infested zone, that's where they're releasing the flies. Every case triggers a new evaluation of the polygons, they call them, where they're releasing the sterile flies. They take into account animal movement, wind and climate conditions and things like that of where to release those sterile flies. They have traps set up where they're trying to attract and capture the wild fly to determine if it's in areas outside of the infested zone. Now, last week they had over 100 traps set out. They've yet to catch a wild fly, which seems crazy, but hopefully that means that there's not a really super large population of those flies, so there's not a lot of them to catch. They have caught the sterile flies. They have them marked. You can tell the difference. So they've caught the sterile flies, so the traps work. However, last week they told us that Mexico had like 90,000 cases of screwworm before they ever caught a wild fly. So it kind of makes sense. You know, the fly is attracted to live animals, living animals, that the blood's pumping and things like that. The attractant in these traps is not living. So they're kind of hard to fool, I think. However, in addition to that, they're flying drones around the infested premises, looking at wildlife. They have game cams set up. They've witnessed, I think they said 70,000 pictures of wildlife on game cams and things like that, looking for wounds on animals. They've observed over 60 species of different wildlife. They've not found a case in wildlife right now, although they continue to look. They had over 100 hours of drone surveillance, things like that. They're using some thermal imaging, which will detect the fly activity or the larva activity on animals, and they're not seeing any of that. So they are looking. Certainly, that's one of the key concerns is if it gets established in the wildlife and things like that. Obviously, they're a lot harder to treat, but that's kind of what they're doing to contain it. A couple of the good things we have going for us is that there are treatments. It's a treatable problem. It's not necessarily a disease that spreads animal to animal. So, and we have a playbook. We have a history of eradicating the fly from the United States. So we've kind of got something to fall back on as what worked before and how to adjust that. So I think that's everything. I usually forget some things that questions prompt. So if anybody has any questions on that, I can fill in the gaps. Kenny.
Yes, on a little different subject. We were at your office the other day at your annual meeting, and we discussed the EID tag situation and the fact that Texas and Wyoming allowed for state ID tags. And we asked if you could do that here, and the fact that we do have a law that says we can do that. And if I understood you correctly, you said that we could use the tags, the metal tag for brucellosis vaccination?
Yes, we can. For my benefit, can we cover the New World screwworm before we get to that, and then we can take other questions, because I can only focus one place. No, not really, but it's helpful for me. So thanks.
I have relatives in Texas. They tell me that the screwworm was introduced in Mexico through the cattle cartels that are illegally bringing cattle into Mexico. And they say that that is happening to a way lesser degree in the United States. Can we tighten our borders even more than we have now to prevent that from happening?
That's a really good question that I don't think I'm qualified to answer. I'm worried about South Dakota's borders more than the Mexican border. They don't have livestock coming over the border right now. We've still got screwworm into the United States despite that. So I think there's a lot of things to consider there. I think that, again, the screwworm, as it moved north, the way it escaped, if you want to think about that, from where it was being contained before was through illegal movements, but that might not be only cattle. And then once it moved into Mexico, they have a tremendous feral hog population. They have a tremendous feral dog population, and those two species were really significant problems in their containment efforts. But I don't think I'm qualified to comment on the borders of the United States.
Dr. Miller, has there ever been screwworm in the northern portion of the state, such as South Dakota, and if so, when, and what was done to eradicate it?
Well, that's a really good question, because I don't know of it being in South Dakota. Maybe somebody can correct me on that. And I would suspect that it can show up. There's no doubt about it. It can show up. What we'll do in South Dakota is similar to what Texas is doing. We're going to try to confine it. Once we have that diagnosis of the problem, then we'll have access to sterile flies. They'll form a surveillance zone and a fly drop polygon around that place. Inspection of the livestock, and that's going to come down to the producers. The assistant state veterinarian in Texas, I've known him for, I've been with the Animal Industry Board 20 years, and he's one of the first people I met, so I've known him for a long time. Very knowledgeable guy, but he's telling his people in Texas, he says, the best thing you can put on your animals, because everybody wants to know, hey, what do I put on my animals to prevent screwworm? The best thing to put on your animals is your eyes. It's very important to see your animals and look for those signs of infestation and wounds and things like that. So that's the first step, is if we have it in South Dakota, control it, and then look for other cases, right? Get sterile flies in there to control it. There's treatments. Get the treatment of the exposed animals as quickly as possible. There's preventive treatments as well that we can use in the areas and the herds around it. Again, the fly goes 10 to 12 miles. Get some treatment on that. What prevented it from becoming established in South Dakota and north of that line in central Kansas was winter. The fly is killed by the freezing temperatures. The larva, which hatches in the ground and becomes the fly, doesn't hatch on frozen ground, things like that. So winter prevents it from being established, and that's really our biggest tool.
Back in the 60s, when I was a teenager, we had yearlings that we had dehorned, and then we saw them out there shaking their heads afterwards. Got them in, they had maggots down in their head, and we used a product called KRS. I remember that on the label it was effective for screwworms. I don't remember seeing anything about New World screwworms, but we'd spray that KRS down in there, and they'd get to swarming around and want it out, and we'd dig them out with our fingers until we had them all. Was that, were those screwworms then?
I think it's unlikely. Not the New World, at least. But I know exactly what you're saying. Even when I was in practice in the 90s, we had a product called Katron. I'm sure everybody used it. It was a blue spray. We used it at home on the ranch when we castrated. Everything got sprayed with that. But once in a while, you'd have a dehorner or an injury that had maggots in it and things like that, and you'd spray that, and they'd just boil out of there, and that would kill them. And that was actually off the market for a long time, but it's been conditionally approved for treatment as well. So those steps that USDA and the FDA have taken to get products that were not approved or had been disallowed back on the market and ready for this has been really beneficial for the treatments.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I'm going to have you switch gears. Let's
Okay.
talk about the RFID tags now.
Awesome. So RFID, switch papers here, get some other notes. You guys are all familiar with this. It's a topic that's been much discussed for a while now. To answer your question, Kenny, the USDA approved metal tags are approved for Bangs vaccination. So we don't have a state rule or law that says it has to be EID. The federal law has recognized that those are approved methods for official identification of Bangs vaccinated heifers. Can be applied. The only thing is just make sure it has the USDA official seal on it, so it's an official tag. Follow up.
Can we purchase those from the company that makes them, or do we go through your office?
You can purchase those directly. USDA is not banned those, so they are available. I don't know if USDA has discontinued their contract with suppliers or if USDA is going to allocate or supply those out, right? But you certainly can purchase those through tag makers, and they'd be, I think they cost like 20 cents or 15 cents or something like that. They're pretty cheap.
So at one time, your office handled metal tags, but I understood that they, under Dr. Thompson, they shipped them all back from USDA. Is that correct?
That is correct. They've been shipped back or shifted to USDA for allocation, both the metal and EID tags. And it might have actually been before Dr. Thompson, it might have been under Dr. Odekoven that we reverted those metal tags. We just didn't have the storage space for multiple thousands of boxes of tags. And there was a time there where it was much more efficient for those tags to be shipped direct from the USDA warehouse to veterinarians that were asking for them. And shipping them to us and then repackaging them, shipping them out to them was just not really efficient. So we were asking the veterinarians, hey, when you're making the tag requests or you need tags, just go to the USDA warehouse. I think it was coming out of Kansas City. And they were able to ship them out and save postage and time and turnaround and logistics and things like that.
Thank you.
You bet.
Go ahead and give us kind of a synopsis of what's been happening with the RFID, and then we'll have Kenny come up and visit a little bit more. But tell us what happened in the start. This was back in 2023, correct? And it was open for comment period up until about 2024, April, I believe.
Yeah, those time frames seem right. It went into effect November 5th of 2024. The EID tag requirement was on animals that were going interstate movement, so across state lines. And only animals that were 18 months of age and older did that apply to. So in the effort to get that to happen and make that easier, USDA requested funding so that they could pay for those tags and supply those tags out to producers. Congress allocated $15 million, and that buys so many tags, X number of tags. I think everybody recognized from the beginning that was not enough tags, or probably not as many as people wished they could get. So South Dakota was allocated a little over 400,000 tags. That number was chosen through a formula or derived from a formula using National Ag Statistics Services. Their numbers for the number of adult cows in each state for the 50 states. Whether that number is 100% accurate really relies on the producers and what information they supply and share. One of the areas that was most impacted by, well, I'll just say the most short on tags was our area up here, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming. They're big Banks vaccination states. We have a rule that breeding animals that go through the auction market need official ID and recorded, which we call it our change of ownership. It's been invaluable to us as we trace different cases of bovine tuberculosis, brucellosis. We haven't had brucellosis trace. I think my last brucellosis trace was 2009 or 11 or something like that. It's been a long time, which is awesome. But that change of ownership database that South Dakota has is not shared by many states. We're fairly unique on that, but it has been something that we have relied on extensively to help us trace animals and disease events, and it's been awesome for us. But because of that requirement, we use more tags than maybe the average state does according to the population. Wyoming and Montana have the DSA and they use more tags. North Dakota has a few, fluky rules that they require, so they use more tags. But anyway, those 4 states were really short. And some states were long, but not very many. Tennessee was gracious enough to share some of their excess tags with those states, us as our 4 states, and we got some tags, but that was a drop in the bucket. That was like 20,000 tags or something like that. It was not very many. So in an effort to, I won't say fix that, but help that issue. There's been a working group formed, USDA and some state animal health officials. I'm on that working group. North Dakota State Veterinarian, Montana State Veterinarian are on that working group. And we've met once, and we're trying to come up with a better way to capture the actual need for tags, okay? And hopefully we can get something that is more equitable for our area. That's the goal. The new allocation of tags for 2026 has started. South Dakota received 14,000 tags. Obviously, that's not nearly enough. But I'm told that this is the first year of a 5-year contract that USDA has with the manufacturers. And by law, they have to run a small percentage of that first run to see if they're accurate, done right, whatever, however reasoning that is. There had to be a limited number, kind of a test run. They did that. As I said, we got 14,000. Our waiting list right now, or I say our, South Dakota's waiting list right now, that USDA has on the waiting list is 350,000. So that allocation, if we have 416 total, they're going to send that out. Right now, the plan is to send 50% of that allocation out and hold the second 50% until this working group can come up with what we hope to be a better number. So hopefully South Dakota has more tags in the future. So that's where we're at with the background of the allocation.
Dr. Miller, how can our state law, which was done in 2022, comply to the USDA to get these metal tags back to South Dakota? It's our understanding they confiscated them all. Did we pay for those the first time, and were we reimbursed the money that when they took them?
So I don't know if confiscate is the right term. I think some veterinarians turned them in because they wanted to switch to the electronic form, and because of limited space and things like that, I think they turned some metal tags back. To my knowledge, we did not pay for those metal tags, and so there wouldn't have been a reimbursement.
So explain to us the metal tags. The first two numbers identified our state.
Correct, 46 for South Dakota.
So on the electronic RFID tags, how do we determine what state this piece of livestock animal has come from? There is no identifying matter in a 14-digit code, correct?
Correct, it's 15 digits. There's the first 3 digits are 840, which stands for the United States. So any of those tags are someplace in the United States. Again, a United States origin animal. How do we find where that tag is when that tag is allocated, there's a database that says it was sent to North Dakota, South Dakota, whatever. When that tag is allocated out to a veterinarian, that database, that number is in the database, and we have the veterinarian. And we call that veterinarian and we say, where did you use this tag? Or in some cases, those veterinarians are sending those to our office the same way they did the metal tags. It's the same process for the metal tags. If we had a 46 metal tag as part of our traces, we knew it started in South Dakota, but we had no idea where in South Dakota. It could have been put in by a North Dakota or Montana veterinarian into a South Dakota animal if they were working in South Dakota at that time. If the owner was in South Dakota, or if they were working in South Dakota, Bang's vaccinating in South Dakota. So we wouldn't know where to start then either. We'd know it was a South Dakota animal, but we wouldn't have known where to start. So it goes back to those databases, which the EID databases function exactly like the metal tag databases did. We go to the veterinarian, where did they, if their records, where they applied that tag, or if they've already sent them to us, we can check that and say, it was applied on this date for this person. We call that producer up and say, do you still have this animal? Or the way that the traces work is we already have the animal. It's a matter of connecting the dots from that animal back to the original owner and how many stops it made between.
You brought up a very good point, this data. At this point in time, the data stops with the veterinarians, and they have documented, probably by paper, what happens and when can it go forward that we have to register our premises. Personally, the rancher has to register a premises for using the RFID.
So I don't know where it goes going forward. You have to register your premise if you order the EID tags yourself. They have to, those EID tags, or metal tags for that matter, need to go to a registered premise. That basically ties you into that record keeping. That gives us a place to start looking. Was there a second part? Did I miss something? Or I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
That's fine. That's fine. Our concern is the government or some other entity getting a hold of this privileged information and premises of knowing how many head of livestock we have here on each of our given properties, and assuming that we are going to have to do what the government tells us through rules or laws, that they are going to make us decrease our herds, do something such as overseas in the Netherlands. Comments?
So the EID tags don't change any of that from what the metal tag already did, right? The EID, a veterinary clinic, a producer could order 10,000 EID tags if they want if they want 10 years supply or whatever. I don't think there's a correlation between the number of tags you use and the number of animals you have. Depends on if you send animals out of state or not. You know, it tells you things like that, but I don't think it ties to the number of animals that any premises has necessarily. I mean, you could make loose assumptions. If you use more EIDs, you maybe have more animals, but there's nothing that ties it together.
Okay. I have a veterinarian in the room. Does he want to ask a question or make a comment?
Hello. Wheels.
So are we able to get a Banks tag with an official seal on it?
As far as I know, those are USDA supplied because they're USDA official seals, but as far as I know, you can order them.
And for those of you who don't know, the USDA law showed up at my place last November because I've been using metal tags for a year, and she told me I was breaking the law, although she did not cite the law that I was breaking, and basically threatened me with my accreditation if I didn't quit. Now you're telling me I was lawful by using a regular metal tag.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know. It sounds like I could go back to using the metal tags I got left.
Yep. As long as there's not for interstate shipment.
Yeah. Seems like I had something else I wanted to ask you, but I can't think of what it is right now. I'm sorry.
What rules do you anticipate Secretary Rollins might be implementing in the future?
Oh. Way above my pay grade.
Myself and the law officer were having a discussion. Does a USDA regulation mandate supersede South Dakota state law? She said yes. She said the USDA mandates supersedes South Dakota state law.
So my understanding is South Dakota has to follow USDA law. We can be more strict, but we cannot be less strict. That's my understanding.
Alrighty, that's all I have for you here.
There's one there. You put the hand in the air really good. I saw it right away.
Well, as a producer, I'm totally confused now. So.
That's the plan.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. So I've basically not been Bangs vaccinating because I refuse to use those EID tags. That's, I feel, my choice. Now you're saying that my veterinarian can get the metal tags, so I could go ahead and Bangs vaccinate without having the EID tag?
Yes.
And if my cattle go to the sale barn and somebody out of state wants to buy them, then what happens?
They're going to have a EID placed in their ear
So
to
do
go to out of state.
So do they do that at the sale barn?
Yes, they will, because the sale barn veterinarian has to meet, the sale barn and the veterinarian at the sale barn have to meet the requirements for the state that's receiving those cattle, and all states require EIDs to cross state lines.
We still have Kenny to come, so if it's something that we can answer through Kenny, we would like to ask too.
Yes, I'm from North Dakota, but we're going through the same thing right now, and North Dakota Board of Animal Health is going to decide what our fate is, which is nice to know that South Dakota now is going to allow you to use metal tags. So when you read the USDA's write-up on this, their goal is EID from birth to slaughter. This is a stepping stone. And so what happened, in my opinion, was the states just followed along. I mean, if they wanted the interstate travel over 18 months of age breeding animals, we should have just stayed there. But then states started putting them in on your Bangs vaccinating, and it made this deal way more complicated than what it had to be. So, and I apologize because I got in here a little bit late. So South Dakota is now, you are stating that as long as you're just Bangs vaccinating your cattle, you can use the metal clips.
Yes, you can, because South Dakota does not have a rule or law against that, and the federal law allows it.
Okay.
All right. Okay. We're running behind.
I do want to address your deal first on the sale barn side of it. The metal tag, however, that's not to the producer as far as any expense. If an out-of-state buyer does buy your heifer calves, they would be the one that has to pay that if they're sending them to Iowa or Missouri or wherever, just so you're aware of that. They would have 2 buttons though, but my daughter now got a second earring, so I guess it's...
Just 2 is good.
I wondered, originally the USDA, did they have a fund set up for the metal tags? Because those were all provided to the states free of charge, were they?
They were,
weren't they?
and I mean, that had been in place for a long time. I don't know that there was a specified funding for that. You know, I don't know if there was an allocation of X dollars for metal tags. They were just always there. We never ran out.
There had to be some kind of allocation of funds.
Well, I
for the
think it
federal
came out of
government
USDA's annual budget.
Well, I guess the reason I'm starting there is that budget, there has to be some place that money was allocated originally. Now the difference is they had an allocation for noose tags, they had an allocation for Bangs tags. Well, the 10 cents, 20 cents, whatever was allocated for, and this is for your working group. I mean, just something
sure.
to take to them. Okay, well now a tag costs $3 or whatever, $2.50. I don't know where you're buying them, what they cost, but those numbers really should be identical. There shouldn't be any guesswork. It should be how many news tags and how many Banks tags have been allocated to South Dakota for the last 20 years. If anything, it should be a little bit less than that just because our herd numbers are lower. So you should be able to get a very solid number going forward so that one producer isn't getting free tags and then the neighbor has to pay the $3 a head to bangs their heifers, because that, to me, isn't right.
I absolutely agree. And we are focused on those historical tag usage numbers as a starting point.
Dr. Miller, thank you. I'm going to bring Kenny Fox up here. He is our committee chair for the RFID, and he's going to discuss a little bit about our ongoing lawsuit with the USDA, RCAF USA, our affiliate. We are working with them, and there's also 2 individuals serving as plaintiffs. And then as soon as Kenny gets done, we're going to take a quick break and get some coffee and some cookies, and we'll get right back at it again. Thank you, Kenny.